and that's coming up on Monday.
Happy April Fool's Day. Little late, isn't it? Isn't it a little late to be celebrating April Fool's Day? I would say. That was like 2 weeks ago, right? Am I right or am I right? It was 2 weeks ago. Today's what, the 13th?
Well, that's what the government tells us, that April Fool's Day is the 1st, but in reality, Monday is April Fool's Day. That's the real April Fool's Day, is Monday, because we Americans have been hoodwinked for 100 years into the idea that paying an income tax and the confiscation of personal property is the right thing to do.
Oh, that April Fool's Day.
Yeah, that April Fool's
Day. That's like a culmination of a whole year of April Fool's Days, isn't it?
That's exactly what it is.
April Fool's extravaganza.
Yeah, and so the thing on Monday is the joke is on us.
Yeah. Well, freedom isn't free, but
well, that's what they say. Yeah. That's what they say. Freedom isn't free.
What about the roads?
Yeah. Yeah, what about the roads?
Mm-hmm.
So we're glad you could join us here on the Stanching Tyranny Hour this Saturday.
April Fool's Weekend.
April Fool's Weekend, and we're going to get right into it.
I bet a lot of listeners are busy with their preparations for the big day Monday.
Yeah, I would think.
We'll have the annual reports from the man on the street.
Oh, I love that.
Where
on
they
Monday
go to the
night,
post office,
like at midnight, and the people are sitting there in their cars
and lining up to do their duty.
Right. And the reporter will go up and knock on the car window, and it'll roll it down, and they'll say, "Why do you always procrastinate with your taxes?"
Oh no, I try to get it done, but I was busy, and now I spent the weekend, and time just gets away from me, and hopefully I'll get a refund.
and the refund, that's a whole other joke.
Oh yeah, right. We're grateful for our lousy refunds.
Yeah,
and some people you gotta watch. Some people we even call it a rebate.
They do.
Like they're getting something for nothing. And granted, maybe they are. I don't know. I know we're not. We're getting a refund, and we paid in way more than we're getting back. That's for sure.
Right.
Maybe it is a rebate for some people. Maybe listeners can give us some feedback on that. 609-407-1450.
Yeah.
Of course, listeners, like I said, they're probably busy.
Right.
Getting ready for the big day.
They probably are.
And, hopefully they're listening, but I understand if they don't have time to call because it's a big day.
No, there are some appropriate things to cook and have as your celebration meal.
Yeah.
Beans would be a good one.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Definitely
bacon.
Beans.
Definitely. Make sure you put the bacon
any pork product
in the beans.
Any pork product is appropriate for the celebration.
Mm-hmm.
But see, the problem I have with people, American citizenry, when they wave their flags, when they're paying their taxes, is they don't realize that income taxes are only about 100-year phenomenon.
Yeah.
See, we didn't run the government with income taxes.
Right.
It used to be that the taxes that the government collected were tariffs and excise taxes.
Yeah. And I find it very interesting that the same year the income tax came to be was the same year that the Federal Reserve Bank came to be.
Well, what are you trying to say?
Well,
that's probably just a coincidence.
Well, sure. Could it be? Possibly. It could be.
Yeah, but
is it more likely that it's not a coincidence? You know it.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk to Carl. Carl took a break from. You get the ham in the oven there, Carl.
Well, let me say this. Some people, it's a payday. Illegal aliens with fake Social Security numbers or TIN numbers, and they claim they're relatives in Mexico, nephews and nieces, and they get these huge refunds, and they didn't pay anything in.
Yeah. Well, that's all right. You paid for it, Carl.
Or how about the prisoners that get refunds and do the same? They do their own little scams.
Yeah.
I don't understand how they get away with it.
Right. Well, I'm sure they'll be coming up to you and thanking you, Carl, for making that
bringing
possible.
it up to them.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, but see, that's why I say the joke is on us. It's no different than the whole should welfare mothers have to take a drug test question, right, in order to receive welfare. Right. I say no, because we should get rid of welfare. Right. That's why I say
that's the real answer.
Yeah. And same thing with income tax.
But they keep us busy.
Yeah. Should the government do something about these people that are perpetrating a fraud to collect false refunds? I say no, they shouldn't. Why? Because they should get rid of the income tax. Right. Well, yeah, that's a good point, Carl. The government gives it to them willingly, don't they?
Absolutely.
Right. Well, with the ones the illegal aliens, they do because the House passed 2 or 3 bills and sent it over to the Senate to stop that, and Harry Reid wouldn't review it or bring it up for a vote.
Yeah,
figure that out.
I can't wait to see this immigration bill, Carl. That apparently is like over 1,000 pages long. Yeah. Can't wait to see that bad boy.
But the whole thing is, you look at how many unemployed and underemployed we have citizens of our country, and you look how many, just trying to guess how many illegal aliens it is, and I'm thinking in my mind, well, if you get rid of the illegal aliens, you deport them back home, there'd be work for the people that don't have jobs, because I'll tell you what, they would do any job right now.
Right.
To have a job.
Yeah.
And yet our government wants to bring more people in on visas, and it's like and I keep emailing them, like, have you figured it out yet?
Yeah. Well, that comes under everything they do. They know what they do, and they do for a reason.
Yeah, it's all by
design. They want. Actually, I guess they're going to be future, or if they're not already, Democrat voters, right?
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. All right, Carl, you have a happy April Fool's Day weekend. Get that ham in the oven.
We have another call. Thanks for calling, Carl. We always love your calls.
And let's go to Andrea in Summers Point. Andrea, I know you got your ham in the oven.
And your beans.
Right.
Well, I got I have a challenge for you, but actually, a happy 270th birthday to Thomas Jefferson.
Oh, well, that's good.
That's great.
What do you think he would have thought of the income tax, Andrea?
Well,
Thomas Jefferson.
First of all, he was born on April 2nd, the day after April Fool's Day, but his second birthday is actually April 15th, because when we got our independence from England, they added X amount of days to the calendar. So he's the only person who has 2 birthdays.
Oh, cool. That's neat. Yeah. Oh, that'd be handy.
That'll really take you through the day.
Our kids would love to have 2 birthdays a year. Our kids would be all for that.
Yeah.
Listen, that's why I'm Jewish. At Hanukkah, you're guaranteed 8 presents.
There you go.
All right. Nah, didn't work that way in my family because we're American, but we celebrate Christmas. But no, it is amazing to listen to people like Thomas Jefferson versus the great genius we have today.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Now, Jim and Jeff, I seriously now, on behalf of the non-believers of North Korea's capabilities of launching a nuclear attack with antiquated missiles against us. I thought it was pretty funny. They illustrated on Jay Leno's by showing a military parade of flexing its muscles with a giant bottle of Coca-Cola and huge packs of Mentos. Now, I challenged you with, which freezes quicker, hot or cold water, and gets up on the task. Yeah. Will you accept the Coca-Cola and Mento explosion challenge?
I would love to do that. I would love to do that. Yeah.
All right, now, if so, and successful, could we harness the combustion energy and make the cyclotron obsolete by splitting the atom with it?
We might be able to.
I think that's the driver of the Hadron Collider.
You've got 2 days before we get hornswoggled.
That's true.
Now, it is funny. I always compare, paying your income taxes, and when you get that stupid return of your own money.
Yeah.
To me, it's kind of like, you reach in your pocket and you find $1 or a $5 bill, and you feel like, wow, this is great. I didn't even know I had that there.
Right.
And it's your own money.
Yeah, it was there all along.
Yeah.
All right, so you're going to take the Coca-Cola and Mentos challenge.
We're going to give that a whirl.
Absolutely.
We'll see if we can split the atom.
Guys.
Thank you, Andrea. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, but Andrea has a good point, right? Here's what the government is saying to us when they collect income taxes and inheritance taxes. And this is from the great Frank Chodorov in his book, The Income Tax, Root of All Evil. I strongly recommend it. You can find it online for absolutely free. Frank Chodorov says, the government says to its citizens, quote, your earnings are not exclusively your own. We have a claim on them, and our claim precedes yours. We will allow you to keep some of it because we recognize your need, not your right, but whatever we grant you for yourself is for us to decide. Isn't that it in a nutshell?
That is it. That could have been exactly from Barack Obama's mouth. I mean, right from his mouth.
Yeah, and there we have it, right? The government decides what you're allowed to keep. Look at this whole retirement account thing that Barack Obama's deciding on.
Right.
Is there any such thing as private property anymore?
$3 million.
Oh, because he
decided,
right.
$3 million, that's enough to have in your retirement account.
Yeah.
And listeners, I know that sounds like a lot of money, but it's
none
just
of their
the
business.
usual game. It's
right.
none of their business. And furthermore, in 10 years, $3 million isn't going to be $3 million.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they know that.
Right.
That's why they put a defined number on there. Same thing with the income tax. The highest rate's above $250,000. Well, there will come a time when $250,000 is the average income.
Yeah, because all they got to do is inflate away the currency,
and they're
which
doing
they're
it.
working on.
Look at Japan. Japan just announced, hey, we're pulling out all the stops. And what did we do in response? Well, at Japan, we would encourage you not to have, what did they call it?
What was it? Currency, devaluation.
Something like that. But, the Treasury Department came out and encouraged them not to go too far with the whole money printing thing.
Right.
While, of course, they go ahead and go too far with all the whole money printing thing.
Getting back to the income tax, the whole idea of an income tax appeals to the green-eyed monster, right? It appeals to envy. Because the whole way it was sold to the American people was, well, we'll just tax them there, rich people. We'll just tax them. Don't you worry about it. No, don't you worry about it.
Right.
But them rich people, we got to get, they got just
they
too
do.
much.
The government's job is to create division and to create infighting because that keeps people busy. And we see it all over the place. It's not just this. It's, it's the gays and the... the blacks
guns
and the gun rights.
Everything.
It's everything.
Yeah.
And they do it on purpose.
Yep.
They know what they're doing.
They do. But let's get to the history of the thing, right? So let's take a little step back in time.
Yeah.
Back in the early 1900s, around 1907, there was a financial panic in Wall Street, a 50% decline in the stock market. And the Congress created a, quote, National Monetary Commission. And it was signed into law by President Theodore Roosevelt, Republican. And it was a study group. And, they wanted to study the financial panics and economic troubles and that sort of thing.
Right.
And the head of this was Senator Nelson Aldrich. Now, Senator Nelson Aldrich was a scumbag. Oh, I'm sorry. But Senator Nelson Aldrich was a business associate of none other than J.P. Morgan. Everybody knows who J.P. Morgan is, right? If you bank.
Oh, yeah.
So
J.P. Morgan was the biggest robber baron in history.
Right. And he was also the father-in-law of John D. Rockefeller. See, Nelson had his daughter marry John D. Rockefeller, and that got Nelson into the ends of the Rockefeller family. Right. So ultimately, Nelson was,
Aldrich.
Aldrich was named the head of this National Monetary Commission.
With the Rockefeller blessing.
So what did they do? Well, they went to Europe. and they studied the structure of the banking and financial system. Now, we know who's in Europe, do we not?
Yeah, Europeans.
Europeans. And
right.
amongst those Europeans, of course, are the Rothschilds.
Ah, those Europeans.
Right? And I can guarantee you they had a hand in helping design, quote-unquote, the banking and financial system. In fact, we have proof of that. Because 2 years later, in the cover of darkness, about half a dozen of the wealthiest people in America took a meeting down in Jekyll Island, Georgia, which was an island owned by J.P. Morgan and William Rockefeller, John's brother.
Mm-hmm.
And Aldrich set up this meeting, Senator Aldrich, set up this meeting to go down there and have the meeting, and it was all secret and, in the dark of night, so there were a bunch of people there. Let's see, you had Aldrich there, and you had the U.S. Assistant Secretary to the Treasury, and he was Special Assistant to the National Monetary Commission, A. Pyatt Andrew, Frank Vanderlip, who was the President of National City Bank, Henry P. Davidson, Senior Partner at J.P. Morgan, and he was Morgan's personal emissary. The president of First National Bank in New York, who was also dominated by J.P. Morgan. Mm-hmm. Benjamin Strong, also of, J.P. Morgan Bank. And Paul Warburg.
The Warburg.
The Warburg. Now, the Warburgs worked for, this Warburg fellow worked for Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Now, who's Kuhn, Loeb and Company? Well, Kuhn, Loeb and Company was a bank owned by none other than the Rothschild family in Europe.
Right.
So they went down there, and then basically, unbeknownst to all Americans, the framework was being set for the greatest financial Ponzi scheme that we pay homage to every April 15th.
Yeah, but wait. That couldn't have been possible. Because clearly it was unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
And the Supreme Court would never go for it, right? I mean, the Supreme Court is there to protect the Constitution, uphold the Constitution. It's a black and white thing, right?
Yeah.
It's either constitutional or it's not.
Correct.
And if it's not in the Constitutional that the government has the power to do it, then it's unconstitutional. It's
correct.
Really simple.
Yeah. And what greater guard of personal property rights is there than the U.S. Constitution?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what happened? Well, I'll tell you what happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly like I said. It was unconstitutional. They knew that they would never get it past the Supreme Court, and that the only way that they could ever make this thing happen is to bypass the Supreme Court. And how do you bypass the Supreme Court?
An amendment.
With a constitutional amendment. Yeah.
Right.
And thus the 16th Amendment to the Constitution was born. And Secretary of State Philander Knox certified to Congress.
Philander Knox?
Philander Knox. Sleepy Phil.
Sleepy Phil?
Sleepy Phil, he was known as. He was old Phil was a bit cross-eyed.
Was he?
So he had the nickname around the halls of Washington there,
now,
Sleepy Phil.
Now I venture to say, Sleepy Phil, Philander Knox, would never get elected today.
It
wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't happen because we have television.
Sleepy Phil, he certified to the Congress that that they had the states needed, the 36 state minimum needed to ratify. The last states to do so were Delaware and Wyoming. And once that happened, it was law. The 16th Amendment came to be.
I have a question.
Old Sleepy Phil was more, I would say, more selected than elected.
Yeah. Can I have a question?
Mm-hmm.
Is it really smart to have a cross-eyed fella count votes?
Well, you know what I'm saying. Yeah, well, Phil didn't have to count votes.
Oh.
But somehow he was able to really develop a strong position. I mean, just that was obviously he was controlled, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was working for someone,
right?
And excuse me, as it turns out, that was exactly the case. What name do you think comes up in Sleepy Phil's history?
Well, I can think of a few. My guess is probably, because it comes up so often in these things, J.P. Morgan.
How did you know?
Well, it's just one of those things.
Yeah, Phil became a lawyer on the advice of McKinley, William McKinley, who was some president somewhere along the line.
Right.
They somehow became close, and McKinley encouraged old Sleepy Phil to become a lawyer, which he did, and old Sleepy Phil became pretty much the wealthy counselor to the extremely wealthy.
Right.
Like J.P. Morgan, the Vanderbilt family, the Carnegies, spent a lot of time working with them. And, of course, like everybody who works with these big, wealthy families, they end up in politics, and they end up figuring out ways to defraud common Americans of their money and give it to their cronies that they work for. Yeah. Because, let's face it, when you're a Carnegie or a Vanderbilt or a Morgan, you just don't have enough money. You need more. And
remember, because in their case, listeners, it really isn't about the money. It's about control. That's what it's about. Yeah. So you're the useless eaters, just like Henry Kissinger calls us. But so there we have on the income tax. But we also have, we have a little bit of a window of time between the meeting at Jekyll Island and the actual passage of the Federal Reserve Act. All this stuff is happening at the same time. So, it's an important thing to understand that the presidential election brought us Woodrow Wilson, which we talked about before, was a whole scam, really. Yeah. Theodore Roosevelt was planted right in the middle of this scam, working for his overlords, the J.P. Morgan family, right?
Yeah, that's why so-called Republican.
Yeah, that's why Roosevelt ran again, was only to throw a monkey wrench into the elections to make sure that Taft wasn't reelected.
Yeah, that's why he was there.
That's why he was there. That's why Roosevelt did it. Right? So we have this,
succeeded.
And he succeeded. Yeah, that's why Wilson got elected. So we have this creator of the National Monetary Commission, right, Theodore Roosevelt, throw a monkey wrench into the election to make sure that Wilson would get elected, right? And we have a prominent people working behind the scenes. That Paul Warburg is one of them, right? The German guy that works for Kuhn Loeb. And also Colonel Mandel House, don't forget about him. We've talked about him in the past.
Who was the real guy behind the scenes who was running things.
Yeah, and he wrote a book, Philip Drew Administrator. Again, that's a free book you can find online. And in that book, Philip Drew is his fella who saw that that such good could be made through government if only we had a nice socialist government.
And it was fiction.
And it was fiction, but
it was
true. It may have well been. So it's interesting that this basically avowed communist viewed the enactment of the Federal Reserve as the crowning achievement of the Wilson administration. So the question is, who brought us the Federal Reserve? We got the Republicans and the Democrats, right? And surely, who brought it to us? Well, really, the Republicans gave us the Federal Reserve Act.
Right.
Because of Roosevelt, et cetera, right? But the real fact is, guess what? They both brought it to us. Because the truth is that the Aldrich plan was the Republican plan. But, see, the Democrats were against this plan. So they came up with their own plan. And that was called the Federal Reserve Act. Now, so what was the difference between the Federal Reserve Act? So surely, because it was a Democrat plan, it must have been better for the people, right?
Well, sure. Prior to that, we had the First Bank of the United States, which was a central bank. I shouldn't say it was a Federal Reserve Bank. It was a central bank. Then they didn't renew that charter, and then some time went by, and we had the second national bank of the United States, which was, again, a central bank. And then that charter was allowed to expire. And by that time, we were in deep doo-doo with Civil War and stuff like that. And they really, the bankers caused the wars. They wanted to get us into debt and create an environment where we pretty much had to give in to borrowing their money.
And Lincoln went to New York to literally talk to J.P. Morgan. And they wanted to loan the government the money at 30% interest.
30%,
Lincoln said no.
Well, he did say no, but ultimately
he gave in.
He had to give in. But so they learned. They learned along the way. They had two charters. Each one was 20 years or so. And so by this third attempt, they've probably figured out, this whole 20-year thing, it's just not working out. We need like a nice long charter. And we need a new name. We need something that make people feel good. Because people trust government now. Which is completely different than just even 50 years prior.
Well, that's true. Because remember, listeners, in the 1800s, the federal government had to be small. Why? Because its only source of income was excise taxes and tariffs. Now, understand something about excise taxes and tariffs. They show up ultimately in the cost of goods and services that you buy. So therefore, it's more of a voluntary tax.
Exactly. Because I, as a consumer, can choose not to purchase an item and thereby avoid the tax, right?
Correct.
And that's my decision. I have my money. I have all of my money, all of the fruits of my labor, and I determine how I will productively spend that money into the economy.
But unfortunately, back in the late 1800s, people were sold into this notion that, you can have the best of both worlds. You can have lower price stuff if only you'll give us the permission to take the money of those guys over there. The ones with lots of money. Let's take their money so that you don't have to pay so much for peas and sesame seeds and olive oil.
And that's exactly what they did. I'm looking at an article from the progressive rag by the name of the Atlantic, how the 100-year-old income tax unleashed the modern U.S. economy. And the last paragraph of this article, the whole thing, makes me sick. But the premise is that these tariffs raised prices and made things unaffordable for Americans, and that had it not been for the income tax, then people basically would have never been able to buy anything. And so the income tax actually lowered prices and allowed people to participate in buying gewgaws.
Well,
isn't that great?
Yeah, maybe I've got this all wrong. Maybe because they lowered the tariffs and made an income tax, if it weren't for that, we might still be in a horse and buggy.
That's true. But of course, the income tax was sold as a way to eliminate the tariffs and taxes. But except for one little thing, they didn't quite eliminate them.
No, there's no such thing as eliminate.
Yeah, they didn't eliminate them. They still existed. Maybe they went down a little bit, but they didn't get rid of them. They just added to them. So the last paragraph, this is just the last paragraph of this stupid, I don't know why I read this
Why do you read these things?
Why do I read this stuff?
I don't know.
I know it's a progressive rag, and I read it anyway.
You said to me, I'm going to read this, and you read me the title. What's the title again?
The title is How the 100-Year-Old Income Tax Unleashed the Modern U.S. Economy.
Now, said
the implication.
I said to you, don't read that. You're just going to get yourself all annoyed and upset.
I know.
But what did you do?
I read it.
See?
I couldn't help it.
See?
It's like watching a car crash.
Yeah. So go ahead and read your last paragraph.
Just let me read this. Nevertheless, The 16th Amendment created a new political and economic environment. It freed us from the shackles of tariff politics, lowered living costs for many Americans, allowed the federal government to raise enough money to build roads, mount the world's greatest army, provide security to the poor, and transform ourselves into the dominant country in the 20th century. In other words, the income tax not only enabled the modern federal government, it enabled the modern U.S. economy.
Isn't that great? See my flag?
Yeah, that's great.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, I like the way you stood up and saluted.
I think I had the song wrong. I think I was playing like the graduation song.
Yeah, that was.
But it sounded kind of like an American.
Yeah, what was that?
I don't know.
Was that Animal House?
I started doing it, and then I realized what song it was, and I'm like, well, I can't really change mid-song. Right. So I just kept it going.
Smooth move.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so we have all these things happening at the same time. We have the Federal Reserve Act. So you have the Democrats and the Republicans fighting each other. The Democrats saying, we need a Federal Reserve Act. And the Republicans saying, no, we need the Aldrich Act. And the Democrats saying, no, Federal Reserve. Republicans, Aldrich. You know what the difference is? The difference was the name,
the word.
People.
Right.
The name.
Mm-hmm.
How many times do we got to get hoodwinked by our politicians in the guise of giving us something, and all we're doing is handing over our life, our liberty, and our property? When are we going to learn? When are we going to learn to just tell the politicians no? Yeah. This isn't about Republicans and Democrats. Listeners.
And then we celebrate.
Yeah.
Every April Fool's Day, April 15th.
Let's
take a quick break and wet our whistles, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to the Stanching Tyranny Hour with Jim and Jeff Stanch on WPG 1450 AM.
You know, the SunPower solar lease is a really popular way for people to go solar these days, and I can see why. You can go solar with no upfront costs and no payment until the system is up and running. Not only that, but that payment will never go up during the 20-year life of the lease, and it's really easy to get started. All you have to do is give us a call at 856-939-6652. A lot of people out there are using the solar lease, and they've eliminated their electric bill. They've replaced it with a fixed lease payment that will never go up, and they're getting additional income every year from the system. Give us a call to find out more, 856-939-6652. The SunPower Solar Lease. There's no easier way to go solar.
Even if you don't have solar on your home, you can be green and earn some green. With the Noggin House Refer a Friend program, you and your friend can earn $200 each every time you refer a friend to SunPower Solar. It's easy to do, too. Just go to refersunpower.com/nogginhouse and enter your name and email address. Then, follow the easy steps to refer your friend through email, Facebook, or Twitter. And then when your friend buys or leases a SunPower system, you each get $200. So you don't even have to have solar to enjoy the benefits of the SunPower Refer a Friend program. Go to refersunpower.com/nogginhouse, enter your name and email address, and refer your friends to Noggin House. Do it today. You're listening to the Stanching Tyranny Hour with Jim and Jeff Stanch on WPG 1450 AM.
All right, we're back.
So here we are. We have this income tax.
Yeah.
We have the Federal Reserve, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the income tax, it started with taxing corporations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then it migrated to the rich people.
Right. They needed some money, and they needed a a temporary income tax on the people.
Right.
Not a lot,
no.
A couple percent.
Yeah.
It's 2 cents.
And at first it was under the guise of war money, for the war.
Right, sure. Yeah, but they had a little problem, didn't they?
It
wasn't too convenient. I would think, they had this new power to tax incomes instead of prices, products, I should say, which would affect prices.
Yeah.
And I imagine that Americans weren't all that fired excited about writing that check every year, were they?
Well, the problem was, they knew they had to move it to the more opulent workers. Maybe they weren't rich, but they made a good living. And then finally, the wealth of the housemaids and the waitresses, they had to get into that, right? Yeah. So it was all about the whole ability to pay doctrine, right? See, this is what they do. They incrementally move it, and we let them move it. See, we always say, about kids, teachers say this a lot. You give them an inch and they take a mile.
Yeah.
Why do we give our politicians an inch? Bipartisanship. You know how that's spelled? Tyranny. Tyranny.
Right.
If you ever hear bipartisan such and such,
be afraid.
The people who are losing are not the politicians.
They're not compromising.
It's you.
Yeah.
But anyway, I digress. So, the problem back then, now imagine this, listeners. Back then, on payday, you went into your boss and you got an envelope. It was a pay envelope. And it had cash in it.
Not only that, but how much cash?
Well, all of your cash.
Right.
Yeah.
All of your earnings
were in the envelope. Now, the politicians knew that they wanted that cash, or some of it. The problem is, these wage earners, they got votes.
That's a problem.
And they don't want to alienate these votes, so they had to figure out how they could make the taxation of their income be more palatable. So they had to be lulled into the acceptance of not soak the rich, but soak the poor. And how were they do that? Well, it was a drug. And they named it Social Security.
Yes.
See, the worker was told that he wasn't paying an income tax when his pay envelope was opened and robbed. He was making a contribution into the insurance.
Sure, he had his own little piggy bank account there with his special number on it, and that was his money.
That was his money, and he'll get it all back when he could no longer work, and he'll even earn a profit on it.
All right.
Yeah. Now, it was a sheer fraud, listeners. Why? Because the government can't be in the insurance business. Yeah. They can call it whatever they want, listeners. Don't forget that.
Oh, yeah. We've talked about before.
Yeah.
Just the name of a law, and this is a Supreme Court decision, the name of the law doesn't have to have anything to do with what's in the law.
Right. So we have it happening right now with the gun law. Isn't it called the Second Amendment Protection Act?
It's a joke.
Give me a break.
That's what they're calling
They ain't protecting squat.
Yeah.
The only thing that they can protect is if they go home and stay there and never come back. How's that?
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
So, the whole Social Security thing was devised. And the thing is this contribution into Social Security is a tax.
Yeah.
There's no obligation for the government to put it in a little account.
There is no little piggy bank with your number on it.
There's none.
Yeah.
It's a tax.
Right.
And what that means is the government can do with it whatever they wish.
And they do.
Yeah. So, remember, every cent, this is from Frank Chodoroff again, every cent taken from wages is thrown into the till of the United States Treasury and is spent for anything the government decides upon. So, too, are the contributions, quote unquote, from the employer. See, because remember, listeners, you have your contribution, and then the employer is forced to contribute the same amount. Now, a lot of people lull themselves into this false sense of security saying, well, they should because blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but that comes out of your pocket whether you realize it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be a fool, right? All these taxes that people yell and scream for the rich and for businesses and take away the loopholes, you know who pays for that, right? You do.
Absolutely.
You do. The politicians will never tell you that, but it's a fact. It's just economic law. Continuing. That is to say, Social Security taxes are taxes, pure and simple. They are forced dues and charges levied by the sovereign on his subjects for the expenses of state. None of the money is held in reserve. None of it is invested. All of it is spent, and it is spent long before the, quote, insured is entitled to benefits.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was the start. Social Security is something, that our government was doing for us,
right?
Not to us.
Yeah, well, and this is always the way they do it. They appeal to the law of envy and greed,
right?
That's in the human heart,
right? But they still had a problem, didn't they?
They did,
and that is that people didn't pay enough in taxes.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Only about 7% of Americans in the early 40s actually paid income tax.
Yeah.
They couldn't stand for that. That's a problem. They had bills to pay. They had pork projects and stuff like that. So they had to increase that tax base. And I'm sure they use the same language that we here today, rateables and revenues and, all that nonsense that's buzzwords for taking your money.
Right.
And that's exactly what they did. The father of the modern income tax, which is based on this very same withholding principle that they use for Social Security.
Right.
Once they had that ability to withhold,
right.
Wow.
Yeah,
let's get busy now. Yeah.
That's the thing, listeners. The Social Security wasn't about Social Security.
No, it was about the withholding. It
was
about getting your money before you had your money.
That's what it was about.
Americans didn't like writing a check every year to the IRS or whatever they called it in those days.
They actually called it the IRB,
IRB.
Internal Revenue Bureau.
Yeah. They didn't like doing that. That was a problem. Furthermore, the government didn't like having to wait a whole year to get some money.
They sure didn't like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they had to do something about it. And the Social Security Act, by design, all along, was intended to give the federal government a constant stream of money, your money, that would not be questioned or argued with or anything like that because it's coming out before you even see it.
Right.
We talk to a lot of homeowners, and it continues to amaze us how many people don't even know what their federal tax burden is.
Yeah, well, because what happens is we celebrate the income tax refund, and again, this is all by design. You think that this isn't set up by design? You're wrong, because what happens, and we've talked to more than one family about this, is we with solar federal tax credit, not to get into too much of it, but sometimes we'll ask, well, what is your tax burden? Oh, I get a refund every year.
Right.
Well, and then the follow-up is to that, well, just because you have a refund doesn't mean that you don't pay any taxes.
Right.
You realize that, and we get that puzzled look.
Yeah.
So on more than one occasion, we've said, well, get me your tax return. Let me take a look.
Right.
And I point to the line that shows that they're paying tens of thousands of dollars.
And I'm sitting there looking at their faces.
Yeah.
And it's unreal. They have no idea.
Yep.
And
that's what the government once.
Yeah. Now, the cool name theme seems to just carry on.
Yeah,
We had Sleepy Fell, Philander Knox.
Right.
But the brainchild of this income tax withholding was a fellow by the name of Beardsley Rummel.
I love that name.
Beardsley. How cool is that?
That is cool.
You think he was called Beard for short, or?
My wife and I, we weren't planning on having any more children, but, it might be worth it just to be able to name a son Beardsley.
I think I have to agree with you there.
Yeah.
So anyway, Beardsley was the treasurer of R.H. Macy and Company.
Oh.
And, interestingly enough, he was chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Now, see, just if we can just digress again, remember, there was a contingent of people that back in those days when the Federal Reserve was established said that, well, the Federal Reserve, that's a central bank, and we need regional banks, we need local banks, because, each economy is different, and that way the people are more direct with their banks. So, of course, the Federal Reserve said, oh, yeah, that's all good. Yeah, we're going to make it like that. So they made the Federal Reserve banks, however many it is, 7 or 10 or whatever, all throughout the United States. It's all a bunch of phony baloney.
Sure, and of course, New York's federal bank has got to be one of the biggest ones.
Right.
I mean, especially in those days, think about populations.
Yeah.
And old Beardsley's sitting around with all these people making all kinds of money.
Yeah.
And, let's face it, he wants some.
Right.
He wants a lot.
I think Tony's got his beans and pork roll cooking, and I wanted to stop and give us a call. How you doing this morning, Tony?
Oh, absolutely. And throw some of them shrimp on the treadmill on the barbie.
Right. Them jumbo shrimp.
Absolutely. At Beardsley there, wasn't he one of the characters on Leave It to Beaver? Wasn't he one of the Beavers?
Yeah, I think
Beardsley,
he was
the next door neighbor or something.
Yeah. I want another kid just so I can name him Beardsley.
Yeah, there you go. But here's the thing. I missed the first couple minutes of your show, gentlemen. I have to apologize. I heard you talking about somebody's 270th birthday. They turned in 270. He's still on the radio too, isn't he? That guy?
Yeah.
He's still on the radio too. That guy.
Not this
but he doesn't
station,
look a day under 250.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. He's looking really good.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, you can see him back there. He even had a wig on back then. He had selling a bobblehead in the background.
Well, they had
that's
those
tax deductible too.
Of course.
Well, they had those powdered wigs then.
Yeah, powdered wigs, absolutely.
I wouldn't mind getting me one of them powdered wigs.
Yeah. Well, he's still wearing one now. He wears a powdered wig, but look,
So Tony, so have you filed your income tax yet?
Yes, I owe money. I have to pay. I put down. What do you want? Part of it to go to. I put it down. I want mine to go toward the sequester so they can let them poor little school kids tour the White House.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea, Tony.
But that's after they,
But I'm sure
after they clear the White House out after they had that another gala event there. That party
they're still
there.
fumigating that, aren't they? From the marijuana with smoke and all that.
And the vomit on the carpet.
Yeah. But hey, listen. There's a big protest out by Whalen's office where the Ace Hardware is or something I've heard on the radio. But Whalen won't be there. He'll be at the Ace Hardware himself, though. If they want to protest, they should protest out in front of the hardware store instead of his office, because I understand they got a sale on extension cords Monday. And he'll be over there buying a new one for his Chevy Volt.
That's a good idea.
He's going to be in there buying a new extension cord for his Chevy Volt over there. So
and see, maybe
they might,
Yeah, and he's perfectly willing to pay the road tax, I'm sure, because
No, he'll write it off on his taxes.
Yeah. So Tony, surely when you owed, and surely it was a small price to pay for being a free man.
Yeah, you realize freedom isn't free.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I wanted part of it to go for the trip there. I understand Dennis Rodman's making an emergency trip back over to North Korea to try and negotiate a peace settlement there, between South Korea and North Korea.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I'm sure he'll do a fine job.
Oh, by the way, I like you guys so much that I finally completed my Moroccan pottery and art class.
All right.
Congratulations.
And I made a ceramic sculpture up of Jim Whalen.
Oh, good.
Yeah, he's got a plastic shopping bag in one hand, and he's peering through the driver's side window of a car with a calculator, looking at the odometer, trying to figure out how many miles they drove that day so he can tax it.
That's great.
Wow,
that is great.
What detail. What attention to the
Oh,
specific.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, I had it out in the sun drying the other day, to dry the paint. I had it painted after I got done sculpting it. And one of the squirrels jumped up on top of Whalen's head. And his tail was hanging just right over the side of his head. He looked just like Davy Crockett.
I thought you were going to say he was doing something else.
Yeah,
well,
he did that too. I had to touch it up again.
There you go.
Jim Whalen does have gray hair, so I didn't have to touch it up that much.
Perfect.
All right, gentlemen. When you put that stamp on the envelope to pay your taxes, just do it with a smile and say, happy, joy, and all that good stuff.
Will do.
All right. Don't worry, you get to do it again next year.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
I look forward to it every year.
Excellent.
Hey,
guys, keep up the good work, and keep trying for that other hour, will you please? Somebody out there in Radio Land, give the Stanch Brothers another hour, will you please?
Do it to
We'll take it.
Thanks,
all right,
Tony.
All right, guys, have a good one.
Yeah, I like the new joke stamps. Have you seen those? They say freedom on the bottom,
and one side liberty. Yeah.
That's the new joke stamp.
Yeah.
When you're sticking that stamp, the freedom stamp, on your envelope that has the taxes that you owe because during the year they didn't take enough from you.
Well, of course, I like to scribble it out and write tyranny.
That's the freedom stamp for you. Yeah. So Social Security, another scam perpetrated on the American people by the politicians that we elect, right?
Yeah.
And so really,
you know what the funniest thing is about Beardsley?
What?
He had a great idea for how are we going to get people to go for this?
Yeah.
It's 1942, and people aren't going to want to, they're not going to be all excited about this. And what are we going to do here? And he said, I know. It's 1942. What we'll do is we'll waive the tax for 1942, and we'll start collecting in 1943 via the withholding. And so we'll give them like a year off of no taxes.
Right.
And of
people
course,
will be all
for that, and they'll be willing to basically exchange that for tyranny. The tyranny of taking their money right out of their paycheck before they even see it, because they're dumb Americans.
Right,
yeah.
right.
And that's exactly what they did.
See, here's the truth. The truth is, an income tax brings about a corrupt people. And the reason is because it brings about moral hazard. The establishment of the Federal Reserve allowed the government to print money willy-nilly. It allowed the politicians to spend money willy-nilly and basically do whatever they want. Before the income tax, they couldn't do whatever they wanted because it was all in the tariffs and excise taxes. Before the income tax, the government was weak and the people were strong.
Not only that, the government was afraid of the people.
Yeah.
They didn't want to shake the people up. Why? Because they knew that they would lose their power.
Right. Yeah. But now, I have to say that the government is strong.
Mm-hmm. And where did they get that strength?
From the income tax.
Right.
And we gave it to them.
Right.
The government is now strong and the people are weak.
Yeah. Here's the proof. I told you when we started, the only 7% of Americans were paying income taxes in 1942.
Right.
Then along came Beardsley Rummel's, let's see, what did they call it? Beardsley Rummel's Revenue Act of 1942, which established the income tax withholding. And a mere 2 years later, by 1944, more than 64% of Americans were paying income tax via this new fangled withholding system.
Yep.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
See, the truth is, the thing that we have to remember is that all taxes come from production, right? Yeah. All taxes come from production. So what happens is it stops production, and it's self-defeating because the government has to try to get all that the traffic will bear without stopping the traffic, right? So what happens? Well, the producer needs to now not think of only how to produce, but how to kind of beat the rap of taxes, right?
Beat the system.
What do they do to take advantage? How do they take advantage of loopholes, right?
Well,
and all those things. That saps production. Why?
Right.
Because it's a distraction. And the government, remember, wants you to be distracted.
Yeah, that's very important.
The government wants us distracted.
That's the reason we have tax deductions.
Yeah. So this Monday, I want people to remember, we wave our flags and proclaim ourselves to be the law of the free, and at the same time support and advocate these practices that basically steal our money.
And that we would encourage our government to steal from a certain class of people.
So don't complain about the government spending. Complain about the fact that they have money to spend at all.
And listen again next week.
The